Hi, B Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Tuesday. What is it now, Ryan? The days are so jacked up for me right now. February 6th, right?
Correct.
And tons going on. Wish there was still an off season, Ryan, but there is no longer an off season. Guys, it is day one of me at the new undisclosed Irish Breakdown location where I'll be doing shows for this next month and a half, as my house has been completely gutted and I no longer have an office. I'll hopefully have one back in about 6 weeks, but that's where we're at. Joined today for segment one by Ryan Roberts, the recruiting director at Irish Breakdown. Because, Ryan, we're going to start off talking about Owen Strebig, who is going to be making a decision on Thursday. Then you and I will part ways after that segment until you and I are back tomorrow for signing day in what will be the most anticlimactic signing day in the history of Notre Dame football. But we're going to just kind of do a final look at the 2024 class as a whole, mostly focus on Notre Dame, do a little national stuff, things along those lines. And then when Ryan leaves, I'm going to dive into my offseason overview of the Notre Dame wide receiver position, which is I don't know that any position on the roster, Ryan, has gone through more of a makeover this offseason than the wide receiver unit, from what it is going to look like to what it was. And you're more than welcome to stay for that segment if you want. And then I'll finish things up by looking at the 2024 defensive rankings for Notre Dame. And then we'll do a mailbag. Going to have a little bit fun, a little mailbag with you all and me. So, Ryan was helping me get the lighting set as best we could. I'm going to end up kind of doing the show somewhere else, but this is where we're going to do it for day one. But wanted to get it going. But, Ryan, topic number one, obviously, Notre Dame is recruiting a very small number of offensive linemen in the 2025 class. They got one player on the board already in Will Black, who they beat Michigan for. It was a very big pickup for Notre Dame. But now another top target is set to make a decision, and that is going to be Owen Strebig from Wisconsin, who is a very big prospect for Notre Dame, and I mean that literally and figuratively. Will be making his decision on Thursday, Ryan. So why don't you just kick us off first with just previewing that decision? Who are the top contenders? Because Owen is not your typical Wisconsin kid. This is a national recruit with a national finals list. And just kind of break down who the top four school, because it's between four, or is it five?
Top five.
Yep. Break down who the top five is, Ryan. Just kind of kick us off with that group and just where things stand with Owen a little bit, just from a previewing when the announcement will be and all that kind of good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So Waukesha, Wisconsin, Catholic Memorial, obviously, offensive tackle, listed 6'8", 290 pounds, 295 pounds, depending on where you're looking. And like you said, he's a national recruit. I mean, he's been everywhere. People are going to hyper focus on the 6 trips that he took to South Bend, but he's also been to USC and Alabama and Miami and Florida State. He's been all over the place, man. He has taken a whole mess of visits. Obviously, he's been to Wisconsin a bunch of times, him being an in-state guy in the state of Wisconsin as well. And the top 5 that he will be picking from on Thursday at 4 o'clock Central Time on the 247 YouTube channel is Notre Dame, USC, Wisconsin, Florida State, and Miami. Yes, are the 5 schools. So those are the ones that made the most logical sense for Owen, especially Wisconsin and USC on top of Notre Dame, in my opinion, because he has been to USC obviously pretty recently. I know they've done a tremendous job with him. Wisconsin being the home states and being the kind of a homegrown kid to a degree, they've done a really good job with him. Obviously, Notre Dame has done a great job. He's gravitated a little bit towards the Florida schools. I mean, I even thought there was a chance the University of Florida might be in his final 5, but obviously he opted for Florida State and Miami in the end. But regardless, he has done his due diligence, to say the least. He has gone to a lot of different places. And I think when you look at those finalists, Notre Dame heads into the decision as the obvious favorite for many different reasons. Obviously his relationship with Joe Rudolph and Marcus Freeman and his consistent attention to come back to South Bend, Indiana, and making the 4.5-hour trip from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is obviously another big school that they have the in-state pool. It is one of those things where Wisconsin has had success, obviously recruiting in the state of Wisconsin historically. It's been quite as good recently as it once was, but they have been producing a lot of good offensive linemen. And Wisconsin traditionally, when you're talking about the Joe Thomases, the Kevin Zeitlers, a lot of great offensive linemen that have come out of the state of the school, historically. Joe Tippmann, most recently last year, going in the second round. So they had the pool there. And then USC, I think, kind of intrigues them a little bit just for it kind of being so different. Like the Midwest powers, it makes sense. He's a Midwestern kid. It's where he's always grown up. It's what he's used to. That's what he's familiar with. But I think going down over to USC was intriguing to him because of obviously it being very different. Going down to the state of Florida with the Florida States, with the Miamis, with the Floridas is interesting to him. It's different, which I think is a big thing. But heading into the visit, you feel good about where Notre Dame is. They have done everything right in this recruitment. They've gotten his constant attention. They've gotten him back to campus. And there is a lot of people on Owen's side, including his head coach, including his family, that are also pro Notre Dame, which obviously goes into his favor.
Ryan, this is an interesting one because I think there's been this assumption, and I understand why. You mentioned the constant visits. Owen's been on a lot of visits to Notre Dame. Not the only place he's been on a lot of visits to. He's been to Wisconsin a lot. I believe he's been to Miami twice as well. Like he's been to multiple places. Of course, you're going to get to Notre Dame more than you've been to USC or Florida State or Miami because it's a drive. You can drive to Notre Dame.
Yep.
I think there's been this assumption that this has been a done deal for a long time. And I think that's a little bit misguided, in my opinion, because I think it kind of takes away from how hard this staff has had to work to get Owen Strebig if they're able to land him on Thursday. This is not a thing where it's just, I mean, I'll say it like that. There are other schools that have certainly caught his attention, not just Notre Dame, heading into that decision on Thursday. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, from the beginning, Owen was very pro Notre Dame in the sense of they brought a lot of attributes to the table that he really liked. I mean, he's a Midwestern kid. So he knows the Notre Dame brands. He knows what it stands for. He's only 4.5 hours away for, drive from Wisconsin. He knows the Notre Dame brands. When you talk to him about it, he mentions it a whole ton. Joe Rudolph is someone that has really caught his attention from the jump because for people that don't know, Joe Rudolph obviously spent a little bit of time at the University of Wisconsin and actually was recruiting Owen for a bit before he made his travels down to Virginia Tech for that lone year. And I really believe that Joe Rudolph has been a massive person in this recruitment for Owen overall. I know that they have a great relationship. Marcus Freeman has been heavily involved in that one, obviously. So is Chad Bowden. So have other commits in the class, like Deuce Knights. I mean, there's been a lot of attention that has been given to Owen. And honestly, Brian, like the one unsettling thing is I wouldn't even call it unsettling, I guess. Maybe that's not the right word. But the one thing that kind of raises an eyebrow is that when a player does visit so many times so frequently, at some point you're like, what's the holdup here? Right? It kind of seems like it's a foregone conclusion, but Owen has always been the type, and he will tell you this, and I've talked to him about this, is that he didn't want to make a hasty decision and he didn't want to ever go back on it and decommit and get to that point where it was just like, I just made an impulsive decision. Right. So, yes, they did have to work for this one because there are pools from different schools that bring different things to what Notre Dame can provide just functionally. Wisconsin is going to be able to have a different pitch to Notre Dame. USC obviously has a much different pitch to Notre Dame. The Florida schools that are on Owen's list, the Florida State and Miami, they have much different pitches. So I think that Owen took his time on this guy and he really just made sure he made the foregone conclusion. Because like you said, he's been to a couple of these Florida schools a couple separate times. He wanted to make sure, and I know he talked about this in his junior day when I had the opportunity to talk to him, was after going to Notre Dame's junior day beforehand, he was talking about, like, I don't need to see anything more at Notre Dame as far as like, I know where things are on campus. I know what the athletic facility looks like. I know what the walk's like through, the courtyard and walking by Touchdown Jesus and all those things. Like he knows those things. The last couple months have more been about, I've been to these places. Now I want to just kind of sit back and I just want to feel what it's really like being there. I don't want to be in awe of all the surroundings and the monuments and all those things. He wants to be able to just process himself at a particular school. So yes, Notre Dame has had to be persistent with this one. They've had to push hard for this one. And if Notre Dame lands him on Thursday, it'll be because Joe Rudolph, Marcus Freeman, the recruiting staff, and everybody put in the work to get Owen Strebig to come to South Bend.
Yeah. And this is one of those ones people have talked about, how important a quarterback is to a class. If Notre Dame lands Owen Strebig on Thursday, you'll know that the quarterback in the class put in a ton of work to make this happen as well. There's been no doubt about that. So, Ryan, let's just kind of wrap this up a little bit by looking at the player.
Yep.
And so we've talked a lot about the circumstances. We know where Notre Dame stands. Obviously, there's the 5 schools that are finalists. It's no secret. We're not giving anything away by saying that we feel like Notre Dame's in a great place going into the decision. I mean, people that cover Florida State, Miami, and Wisconsin would tell you that as well. Notre Dame's been
Yep.
considered the team to beat for a while. Now it's about closing time. And there's a couple other aspects about this. One of which we'll talk about after the decision, however that goes, about what this means for Joe Rudolph and what does it say about Joe Rudolph. But there's a lot of things that go into it. But obviously, there's going to be okay. Well, what kind of player are one of these 5 schools getting? So let's talk a little bit about Owen, because he is a kid that I have not found any highlights of. What you have to do is you have to watch game film. There's actually a lot of game film from his sophomore and junior seasons out there to evaluate. So let's talk a little bit about Owen as a player. Number one, let's just look at it from a recruiting profile. You've mentioned it. Owen's listed between 6'7", 6'8". He's between 290 to 295 pounds. From a recruiting ranking standpoint, consensus 4-star player. Rivals has him as the number 65 player in the country, the number 6 offensive tackle. On3 ranks him number 111 in the country, and ESPN has him ranked number 144. 247, shocker, is the outlier. They have him he's not even ranked in their top 247, but he is still a 4-star and the number 2 player in the state of Wisconsin. So from a ranking standpoint, that's what he plays. He plays left tackle in high school. Let's just talk a little bit, Ryan, or have you talk a little bit about just a brief overview of what Owen Strebig is as a player, what you like about him, and what kind of player whoever lands him on Thursday is going to be getting.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody listening out there that would like to see Owen, I mean, like you said, Brian, there's some game film out there of Catholic Memorial because obviously they're a very good school in the state of
Like 6 or
Wisconsin.
7,
I mean,
there's like 6 or 7 full games, folks, that you
yep.
can go online and find. It's really good film.
You can also find on YouTube. I think he does have his junior highlights that are on YouTube now. So he does have a little bit of just kind of some quick cut ups if people don't have a ton of time to watch game film like some people do, right? So I would say this about Owen Strebig,
What are you trying
6'8",
to
and
say,
that wasn't
Ryan?
a shot
Hold on a
at
second.
all.
What? Okay.
I know that wasn't a shot at all. I watch probably more game film than just about anybody, so that's not a shot
Okay,
in any
just
world.
making sure.
That's all I do. Owen Strebig, like you mentioned, 6'7", 6'8", 290, 295 pounds. He also reports, and I don't know how, I haven't verified this, obviously. I've never measured the young man, but he says that he has 34.5-inch arms and an 84-inch wingspan, which is obviously when you're talking about the dimensions of an offensive tackle, it's what you're looking for, man. I mean, you want a guy that is 6'6", 6'7" plus. You want a guy that's right around 300 pounds, and obviously in the early stages, and you want 34-plus-inch arms at offensive tackle. That's what you want. And he just has a natural blend of raw power, core strength, and he has some explosiveness that he brings to the table as well. I mean, he's recorded over a 30-inch box jump this offseason, over a 30-inch vertical overall. So he's a pretty explosive kid. I would say for me, he's still growing into his body, in my opinion. I think there's some the natural things of a 17-year-old kid that's 300 pounds. He's still learning how his body maneuvers fully, but I still think that you see everything flashing on film as far as I think he has good foot quickness for his size. I think he has very good raw power. I think he has length. I think he has all the attributes that you look at and say, that's what an offensive tackle needs on the next level. And as he becomes more just privy to how his body works and functionally how his movements are going to improve as he grows into his body, I think he has a chance to play either tackle spot on the next level. Like I truly do. I think that he has the requisite arm length, explosiveness, foot quickness to play either spot. Regardless, this is a true offensive tackle because I know that people have been posing the question of, hey, if you get a Will Black, you get Owen Strebig, then let's say you get a Matty Augustine and a Jack Lang in the class in a hypothetical. Who plays guard? And my answer would be, well, Owen Strebig wouldn't be one of the guys that I would potentially move into guard. Like he's tall, he's long. I'm not moving that guy potentially inside the guard, in my opinion. And I think that he has all the requisite things to last outside because I think that as he continues to develop and gets more consistent with his footwork and the abilities of just how his body maneuvers, I think he has big time upside as an offensive tackle.
Ryan, when you look at him, I think you nailed it right there. There are other players right now that are better players than Owen Strebig today. because I think you talked about he is still growing into his body. There are aspects of filling out that are going to happen. There's some technical things that still need to be improved, all of that kind of stuff. But I think you nailed it though. Like, for example, I'll say this. I think Jack, like to me, when I watch Jack Lang play, if I had to pick a guy to play left tackle for my high school team, I might consider taking Jack Lang. But when I look at Owen Strebig, the thing I do like about him though is because you said a lot of those different traits. There's a lot of room for him to go from where he is now to where he needs to be. And the other thing, he doesn't really need to put on any weight. Like he
No.
will, but like
Yeah.
he's already at that weight where it's like it's about body redistribution, and that could end up resulting in another 15, 20, 25-pound jump, natural jump, but could also be where he stays around that 305 range and is just more of like a Mike McGlinchey kind of, solidly built dude. That'll happen in time. But I think you nailed it, Ryan. I think this is a kid that's still a lot about upside. He's a good player now. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like he's some raw, doesn't know how to play the game of football type of kid. I'm not saying that at all. I just think he's one of those kids that there's a lot of room for him to still get better, he's going to change physically. You talked about that explosiveness. I think that's going to take another jump as well, Ryan, once he stops growing. And that tends to be an issue sometimes with these kids that are so big like he is, that it takes a little while for them to kind of stop growing and see that jump. And I think Joe Walt's a perfect example. Joe Walt was a kid that put on 30, 40 pounds at Notre Dame, but he had that baby face. He had like a young looking overall body. I think Owen's very similar in that regard. I'm not saying Owen's going to be as good as Joe Walt, but what was shocking, the most shocking thing to me is Joe Walt put on 40 pounds in a year and got faster, more athletic, and more explosive. If Emil Wagner put on 40 pounds in this next offseason, he would get tight and slow down. I mean, and I think Owen has one of those body types that once he stops growing, he's going to see another big jump in just power and explosiveness, especially kind of gets more weight room strength. So I think there's a lot of untapped potential in this young man as well, even though his film is still already pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I think he has one of the highest upsides of any offensive tackle in the 2025 class overall, I would say. And I think that the things that there's building blocks obviously to work with, which makes you come to that conclusion, because I do think that he has pretty good bend for a kid that is 6'8". Like he's not a stiff, he's not a guy that is just playing high all the time. You can see it especially in his run blocking that he plays with pretty good pad level. He plays with good leverage. He's able, because Catholic Memorial, for people that have never watched them, they had a running back in the 2024 class that's going to Penn State, and they run the football a whole lot. So he's run blocking a ton, and he has that just displacement power he brings to the game. He can move players at the point of attack with physicality. There is a big jump that Owen can definitely take. There's no doubt about it. And that's the reason why his offer list is the way it is. Why is USC and the Florida schools and Alabama and all these other schools that are prominent programs going after a big offensive lineman from Wisconsin, right? Why is Alabama going up to Wisconsin to see Owen Strebig? Why is Florida? Why is Miami? It's because all those tools are there. Like they see it and it's very easy to see. So if he hits his upside, if Joe Rudolph is a good developer of talent, if long-term he's able to put on that good weights and be able, because he does have a clean frame. Like he's 290, but like he's not fat. He's just a big kid overall, right? Like he's just a big frame. So if he's able to develop properly, I think that he has some of those upsides where you look at it long term and say he could be one of the next great offensive linemen at Notre Dame if he chooses Notre Dame on Thursday. He has that type of upside without question.
Ryan, I think a part of it you hit on as well. I think that's an important part to note, right? Florida State's one of the schools he's looking at, right? We talked about this. Miami is a school that he's looking at. Wisconsin, and who's the fifth? I always forget who the fifth is.
USC.
It's Miami with USC. USC. These are programs that don't need to go to Wisconsin to find offensive linemen. That's the whole point. Notre Dame, you understand, of course. Notre Dame and Wisconsin makes sense geographically. It's not like he's a super highly ranked guy. It's not like he's like David Sanders ranked, where some schools recruit guys based on profile. Let's be honest about that. And I know for a fact that there are Power 5 schools who have been very successful. This isn't even a debate. This is something that I know to be absolutely true. They get bonuses for where their class ends up ranked at the end of the year. So when it comes down to a couple kids, you're going to take the kid that's highly ranked over the kid who's the 3-star developmental guy because you want to get your bonus at the end of the year. This isn't that for him. And so to me, that's something that you also take into account when you look at Owen Strebig, and why these schools are looking at him is because he's a guy that they just see that upside, and that's a big
Yep.
part of this.
Well, and he kind of checks a lot of boxes that you look at, right? I mean, I've been talking about it with Joe Alt from the NFL draft perspective over the last few weeks, and it's just like Owen's film is going to take a nice jump because again, he's a 17-year-old kid. But when you're talking about the size, when you talk about the length, when you talk about he plays at a good school in Wisconsin, I mean, one of the highest levels in Wisconsin. When you talk about the fact that he's a high academic kid and that he's a worker, I mean, kid works his butt off.
Hmm.
I mean, if you follow him, you'll see him all the stuff he's doing as far as with personal trainers and offensive line coaches, just outside of his normal duties at Catholic Memorial. So he kind of checks a lot of boxes, man. And I just really I would be surprised if Owen Strebig picks Notre Dame if he comes to South Bend and doesn't work his tail off. Like he's just not one of those types of guys, in my opinion. Although he's getting a lot of publicity. I mean, he just got picked for some program to come out to Las Vegas this weekend for the Super Bowl as like a representative of the state of Wisconsin by the Green Bay Packers. I mean, he's getting a lot of
Yeah.
recognition, obviously, but
Damian
yeah,
Shanklin had that for the state. Did you see that? Damian Shanklin's getting that for the state of Indiana. So
yeah,
for
yeah,
The Colts picked Damian Shanklin in Indiana. So that'd be pretty cool. I've never
yeah.
heard of that until recently. That's a pretty cool deal.
I think it's relatively new. I actually just talked to Owen about it, and he was like, "I had no idea that was happening." He's like, "I didn't even know that was a thing." So they're bringing all those guys out to Las Vegas the end of this week for the Super Bowl festivities. Obviously, going out there in Nevada, which will be obviously a great situation. But my point is that he's an all-state player. He's going to be in one of the major all-star games next year, more than likely. I think he actually may have already had an invite in that. He's being selected by the Green Bay Packers as their state representative from Wisconsin. He's a
Yeah.
big-time dude, right? As far as
Yeah.
like the recognition he's getting. Despite that, he's a worker. And if he comes to Notre Dame, it's because he wants to work. There would be
Right.
a lot easier ways out. He can go to USC, all due respect, and go down to
Yeah.
Miami, to Florida State if he didn't want to work, if he wanted just kind of that instant gratification that we all know is out there potentially for some guys like him.
Well, and Ryan, you've gotten to know him a little bit during the recruiting process. Owen's always been very approachable as well, and he's got a little. I've had a couple people say, well, I think he might be too like big time than what you normally talk about offensive line. I'm like, no, don't confuse the fact that he goes to all these visits and wants to see all these schools as he is. He thinks he's big time. That is
Yeah.
from talking to you. That's never been the thing. This is a thoughtful kid that whatever
Yep.
decision he wants to make, he wants it to be firm. And he said to you very also, I know that like you said earlier, he does not want to make this decision more than once. He would rather
Right.
wait, take his time, make sure he's experienced all these different programs that he's shown a ton of, and a lot of it is about respect. These schools are investing the time in me. I owe it to them
Yep.
to go down there on my dime and meet with them and experience what their program is all about. So I actually look at his, because I do get concerned, Ryan, when you get those offensive linemen that are kind of, they like to be big time. They like to get the spotlight. It's like, is that kid like that really going to fit into the Notre Dame O-line room or the Wisconsin O-line room or, a program
Right.
like that? That's not really what this is about for Owen. This is about a thoughtful kid that
Yep.
appreciates all these schools, but also wants to make sure that whatever decision he makes is the right one. And you can't really do that unless you have like a dream school or just one school so much better, unless you go experience it, go see the schools that you want to see.
Right.
And
Well,
it's still only February, man. We act like we're getting close to signing day or something like that. It's still February, you
right.
know?
Well, I'll have a great story for everyone if he picks Notre Dame as far as like how he doesn't really like the spotlight on him, but that'll be a
Hmm.
conversation for a
Yeah.
different day. But regardless, I would say this is that we are in the age of it's now the year 2024 where NIL is a very real thing. And NIL, I mean, in the correct perspective of branding will help you be able to create a incentives to your name, right? Will be able to help you profit off of your name. And I think that Owen is just one of those kids that understands that part of it, right? He's not looking for a payout. He's not looking for a guy that's just wants the gratification of everyone telling him how great he is all the time. Like that's not his thing. Behind the
Yeah.
scenes, he's
It's not
working
which
his butt
school's
off
offering
of
him the biggest NIL deal, to your
right.
point. It's just, that's not what these visits.
It's
He didn't go
it's
down to Miami recently saying, okay, guys, what's your final NIL
yeah,
offer? Notre Dame's got this
right.
on the table. Florida State's got this on the table. That's not what this is about.
Yeah. It's about personal branding and it's about making yourself a more valuable commodity. And in today's world, whether people like it or hate it, that's important. It's important nowadays, and I don't blame anybody for wanting to do that as long as they are doing that for the right reasons. And that I think that Owen is doing it for all the right reasons.
Well, that's going to do it for this part of the show, part one. So, Ryan, we'll be back Thursday. You and I will be back tomorrow to preview this, and then we'll go live at the Thursday night show. It'll be me, Vince, and we'll see. We'll get a couple other people. Going to see who's going to be on with us because Sean Stires is out of town. So we'll discuss whatever decision he makes Thursday night, and then have some other topics that we'll dive into on Thursday night as well. So he's going to make his decision 5 o'clock. Eastern, right, Ryan, on Thursday, and then we'll
Yep.
preview all that, break all that down, and of course Ryan will have, he'll have his feedback on it at the boards at irishbreakdown.com. So Ryan, I'm going to move on to receivers next. You can take off if you want, or you can hang around, talk some receivers with me, whatever you want to do. But before we do that, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and if you haven't done so, Ryan and I talked today about couple intel pieces he's going to be working on regarding the Notre Dame defensive line and some of the info he's gathering and some different intel things we've got planned, some different film breakdowns got planned, all types of great stuff coming up that you can only find at the Irish Breakdown message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Let's dive into part two of today's show. And again, folks, I do apologize. I know the camera is not great today. I'm a little bit hazy, which is probably a good thing. You can't see as much of me today, but we'll get this all figured out. Like I said, this is day one in the new place. When the show's over today, I'm gonna go around to the place and test out some different angles and some different places, and we'll eventually get settled. And by tomorrow's show, we'll be in a much better place. So, but part two of today's show is going to focus on so we're going to put this up on the podcast. So I explained that to you guys on the video. They don't need to know that on the podcast. So I'm going to kind of kick the second part of the show off here in a second, a little bit different. But I just wanted you guys to understand kind of where we were and as far as this production. This is going to be a 6-week thing, just to remind you guys too. So unfortunately, this is where it's at. So we are here in South. I'm at least in South Bend now, not in Granger anymore. So in our office here in good old South Bend. So part two of today's show, we're going to continue the offseason overview of the Notre Dame football team. We talked about the quarterback position already. Then last week we talked about the linebackers. And today I'm going to talk about the Notre Dame wide receivers because this is, I said at the very beginning when I was talking to Ryan, I don't think there's a position on the team this offseason that has gone through the makeover that the wide receiver room has gone through. You could argue that the offensive line went through a big makeover, but that started last season. And so, like, you saw Charles Jagasaw taking over for Joe Wall. You saw Tosh Baker taking over for Blake Fisher. You saw Billy Stroud and Ashton Craig get inserted into the lineup. So obviously the offensive line, which I'll talk about next week, looks a lot different, but that started already. I'm more referring to the offseason, and this is sort of an offseason overview of where the Notre Dame receiving core is. And you've had an offensive line, you still have the same position coach. Linebacker, there's been a lot of changes, same position coach. You've got some guys coming back that have played a bunch of football. When you look at the wide receiver position, you've got a new coach. You've got a completely different looking roster in so many different ways. And that's where it can create some excitement, which you'll see in the chat with some. It also creates some uncertainty, which you can rightfully see in the chat as well, because there's a lot of potential with this group, but it's still very much I don't know what they're going to be type of group. I don't know what this receiving core is going to be, but I like the potential. And that's the biggest thing. The biggest aspect of this is there potential in the room for the Notre Dame wide receivers to take the step they need to take to be part of a big time offense. That's going to be the big thing. And so that's kind of the question that we have to answer is the talent there? Is the potential there? Is it the right fits? One of the issues that we looked at last year with the receiving core was they didn't fit really great together. And you had a bunch. What I mean by that is once Deion Colsey went down, and they didn't play him a ton early, which it is what it is. There's no need to rehash that. Different offensive coordinator, different receivers coach. There's no point in wasting time on that again. But they didn't play him a ton early. He did very well when he did play. But Dion was the only true boundary receiver they had. I know Jaden Thomas was starting there, but Jaden is not a pure boundary player. Jaden is a guy that has the potential to be a boundary guy. But Jaden Thomas, and I've said this for 2 years, and I still believe this to be true, Jaden Thomas is at his best when he can be utilized kind of all over. Let him play multiple spots. Let him be boundary one series or one game, slot, field. Let him move around and be that kind of player. That's really where you need to be with Jaden Thomas, in my opinion. But you couldn't really do that last year because he was the only big-bodied player you had. You had a bunch of younger players. And honestly, most of your roster projected better as slots. Chris Tyree projected as a slot. Rico Flores felt his best position was slot, and there was some truth to that. Jaden Greathouse did his best work as a slot. Matt Salerno was probably better suited as a slot. And Jaden Thomas, until this year's bowl game, I would argue the best games that we'd ever seen Jaden Thomas play were primarily from the slot. This receiving core is going to fit a little bit better, we think. But there's so many questions that have to be answered about this group, and that's kind of that's where we're going to be, honestly, with this group. Is there's a lot of potential, but there are also a lot of question marks. So what I'm going to do in today's show is I'm going to follow the normal format: what was lost, what returns, what's new. We'll talk about whether or not this position group is a strength or a concern heading into the spring. And then we'll ask some very important questions about this Notre Dame receiving core and what kind of potential it has and what are some of the concerns that we have heading into spring ball, which is a little over a month away from starting. So let's first talk briefly about what was lost. And what was lost was you look at a group of players. Hold on a second. Let's talk about what was lost. And first of all, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We're just going to kind of briefly look at what was lost. But what was lost is important because we can talk about the receiving core last year not being overly talented or not being overly productive, but I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I do think the receiving core lost good talent and they lost production. When you talk about what was lost, Notre Dame lost Chris Tyree, who was a starter. They lost Rico Flores and Tobias Merriweather, who combined to be the starting X last season, which is the field outside guy. Tobias started 6 games. Rico started 6 games. They lost Matt Salerno, who missed most of the year with an injury. And then they lost Braylon James, who was primarily a backup. But that Tyree Merriweather Flores group combined for a lot of production last year. And all 5 of them together, and only 3 of these catches, and I think it was about 41 of the yards came from Salerno and James. The rest of it came from the 3 that was lost. But Notre Dame is from a group that wasn't super productive last year. Notre Dame is losing 70 catches, 1,201 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns from the 2023 roster. Now, I'm not talking career numbers. I'm talking because Chris Tyree's close to actually went. Oh, I think Chris Tyree went over 1,000 yards. Let me just check that real quick. And I want to make sure that I'm accurate on this. He's close to 1,000 yards receiving in his career because he had pretty good. Yes, Chris Tyree went over 1,000 yards this season in receiving, or no, excuse me, in rushing. And he's over 1,000 in rushing. He was just under in receiving. So he had 940. He has 945 career receiving yards, 82 career catches. So Chris Tyree had a lot of production in the pass game even before this season as primarily a running back. This year he caught 26 passes for 484 yards. That's gone from the roster. Rico Flores came in this past year as a true freshman, played a bunch as a true freshman, ended the season as a starter. He's leaving, and he caught 27 passes for 392 yards and a touchdown as a freshman. And then Tobias Merriweather, who began the season as the X and was really one of their best big play weapons, he was their only regular to average over 20 yards a catch, had 14 catches for 284 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's a lot of production that was lost from that 5-man group. And that's from a group that wasn't overly productive before. And what's interesting is it's you think about a group that lost that kind of production for a team that didn't have over 3,000 yards receiving passing last year from its starting quarterback. And you think about what returns, and there's actually a decent amount of production returning. And that's kind of the next part of it, is what is back. And this is an interesting part of it, because I think what was back was not necessarily overly productive last season, but it is a group that, to me, has a lot of talent and has a chance to be a lot better for two reasons. And one is experience and one is injury. So when you look at what comes back at the receiving core from last year, you've got Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey are the veterans that are back this year. They'll both be seniors. They were both banged up a lot of last year. Deion Colsey got hurt in the third game of the year, didn't play the rest of the year. Jaden Thomas, got hurt against Ohio State and was never healthy the rest of the regular season. And then you look at what happened in the bowl game. Jaden Thomas is back and he's healthy, and he had all that time to rest. So what does he do? He comes out in the bowl game. He catches 4 passes for 59 yards and a touchdown. When you look at from the Ohio State game, which was September 23rd, he caught 1 pass for 7 yards, got hurt. From that game to Stanford, so I'm going to include that game. So that's a stretch of 8 games. Jaden Thomas caught 5 passes for 63 yards in 8 games. And then he comes back for the bowl game, 4 catches, 59 yards, and a touchdown, which is like a quintessential Jaden Thomas performance. That's more of who Jaden Thomas is, and less of, what we saw as that guy in the middle. And so to me, when I look at him coming back, getting him back healthy, you're getting a much better player than you had almost all of last season. You get Deion Colsey back, and you've got him healthy. That's getting a completely different player than you had all of last season. So it's not just 2 names that return to the depth chart with X number of yards and production. You're getting, as long as they can stay healthy, and that's going to be a big question mark with these guys, is can they stay healthy? You're getting a talent and a level of production that exceeds, in my opinion, what you saw last season from Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey. Jaden finished here at 21 catches for 310 yards. He had 12 catches through the first 4 games. He was averaging 3 yards a catch. He was on pace for about 40 catches, over 40 catches last season before the injuries set in. Deion Colsey had 3 catches in the first for 45 yards in the first 3 games. So there was obviously a level of production that we could have expected from him if it wasn't for the injuries. Then you have the 2 sophomores that come back. And so when I'm talking about what returns, I'm talking about the guys that played last year. I'm going to talk about KK Smith here in a minute. But you've got Jordan Faison and you've got Jaden Greathouse. Now, Jaden Greathouse led Notre Dame in receiving touchdowns last season with 5. He's another guy that, started off very well, had 13 catches in the first 4 or 5 games. I'm actually going to see 6, 10, 12, had 12 catches in the first 5 games. And then went the next 5 games because of an injury and did not catch a single pass before he finally broke out in the last 3 games, where he caught 6 passes in the last 3 games. So another guy that battled injuries last year, but before the injuries looked really good. Had 3 touchdowns in those first 5 games as well. So you're talking about a guy in him that's going to be a year older. He's going to have another year of playing college football in the system and all those type of things. And the expectation is he's going to be a lot better this season. Jordan Faison's another kid that's interesting, where I think some of these numbers, when you talk about they're coming back, can be a little misleading. Jordan Faison last season had a very good freshman season, caught 19 passes, had 322 yards and 4 touchdowns. The interesting thing is all of that production came in the last 7 games of the year, because he did not play in the first 6 games of the season. And so obviously his first catch of the year was, I believe, a 36-yard touchdown against Louisville. Caught at least 1 pass in every game after that. Finished the year on a very high note. Caught a touchdown pass in each of the last 3 games. Had 3 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown against Stanford. Had 5 catches for 115 yards and a touchdown against Oregon State in the bowl game. So you have 2 freshmen coming back that put up a lot of numbers. You have Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey. So when you talk about what was lost, I said 70 catches, 1,201 yards, 7 touchdowns. But what returns, and this is just receiver, is 61 catches for 942 yards and 12 touchdowns. So obviously that's decent production as well. But here is where things get interesting. So if you just look at what comes back, Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey, Jordan Faison, and Jaden Greathouse. For me, if it was just those 4 plus, whatever depth was behind it, I'd say this has a chance to be a good receiving core. Not a great one, but a good one. I'd have some questions about speed on the outside. I'd have some questions about injury history because 3 of those 4 guys have missed games. Both all actually just missed games last year because of injury. That would be a concern, but there's talent there. Jaden Greathouse has a chance to be a really, really good football player. And in my opinion, if depending on the offseason he has, it would not shock me if Jaden Greathouse is the leading receiver next season from a catches standpoint. I'm not saying I expect him to do that. I'm saying he could certainly be that kind of player. Jaden has that kind of talent, in my opinion. You've got Jordan Faison coming back. You've got Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey. So there's talent there coming back. But what really gets you excited is for me, I'll speak for myself. What gets me excited is not so much just that group by itself. It's not so much the newcomers by itself. It's that group together. And so obviously on top of Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, Deion Colsey also coming back, Notre Dame is adding 6 newcomers to the depth chart, plus a guy that I kind of count as a newcomer in KK Smith. And the reason I count KK Smith as a newcomer is because I know he was on the team last year, but he missed summer workouts. He got his shoulder surgery pretty early on. This was an injury that he suffered in high school. He missed all season. I don't believe he came back really till bowl prep. So he has about as many practices going in under his belt going into the spring as CJ Carr has going into the spring. So KK was not really a guy that you look at and you're like, well, he didn't play last year, but he was on scout team all year. He was with the team. He was with the team, but he didn't play until the end. So you add KK Smith into that. So you're going to have 3 transfers, a redshirt freshman who missed almost all of last year that has loads of ability, and then 3 new freshmen coming into the depth chart this offseason. So to me, it's that combination of the 2 that starts getting me a little bit fired up about what this team can be and what this receiving core, I should say, can be. Because when I talked about what was lost, 70 catches, 1,201 yards, 7 touchdowns. What returns, 61 catches, so 9 fewer catches, 942 yards. That's about 243 fewer yards and 12 touchdowns. So 5 more touchdowns. Look at what they're adding. This is 2023 numbers only. The 3 transfer receivers, Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, and Jaden Harrison. So that's from Florida National, Chris Mitchell, Clemson, Bo Collins, Marshall, Jaden Harrison. You're adding 130 catches, 2,038 yards, and 10 touchdowns from last season. So when you look at the 2 combined and you look at Notre Dame's returning 2023 production, so this is the number of FBS level catches, yards, and touchdowns that this unit combined for in 2023 alone, it was 191 catches, 2,980 yards, and 22 touchdowns is what they returned from the receiving core, just the receiving core alone. Now, keep in mind, Notre Dame's entire offense last year only had 3,205 yards passing. That doesn't include the tight end room. And when you look at what's coming back in the tight end room, because when you start looking at that and you start looking at the fact that I think all 4 of the returning running backs caught touchdown passes last year. Yes, I'm correct on that. Jabron Payne caught 2, Jadarian Price caught 1, Jeremiah Love caught 1, and Devin Ford caught 1. They all last year had touchdowns. And then all 3 of the returning tight ends that were healthy this past season, or actually, 4 of the 5 returning tight ends who were on the roster. You take Kevin Bauman out because he was hurt all year, but you've got Davis Sherwood had a touchdown reception, Cooper Flanagan had a touchdown reception, Eli Raritan had a touchdown reception, and Mitchell Evans had a touchdown reception. Plus, you look at the production that's coming back from that group from this past season, and all of a sudden you've got 37 more catches being added to your roster just from the tight end position alone. And then when you look at it from a yard standpoint, you've got 510 yards of receiving coming back just from the tight end position. So you add all that production coming back at receiver, and tight end and running back, you've got way more yards, way more touchdowns, way more everything coming back than what you had as an entire team last year. And so, to me, I look at it and you start saying, hey man, there's a lot of talent coming back in this room, but it's also um, it's also a lot of production. Okay. And so to me, you start to understand why you um, start getting excited about this receiver room next season, or at least why I'm starting to get really excited about the receiver room next year. And you look at the career numbers as well: 362 career receiving yards, 5,309 total yards, and 42 touchdowns. And that's what's coming back at the receiving core. So you've got a completely new look, new group receiving core coming back next season. And that's something that kind of gets me a little bit fired up about this group. But it's not just okay, there's talent and there's production coming back. I don't think anybody doubts that. I don't think anybody kind of looks at that and says, hey, I don't there's not a lot coming back that's proven that anything at the power at the group at the the FBS level. There's really not a lot of talent coming. I think we can all agree that there's some level of production and there's some level of talent coming back, right? And so to me, I think that's something to be fired up about, but it's more than that. You're also adding specific skills. So let's look at the new look wide receiving core and how it compares to what Notre Dame had. Number one, you've got more outside talent. You've got Colsey coming back healthy. You've got Bo Collins coming back in the summer. You've got Chris Mitchell coming in this spring, or he's actually in the winter. He is an outside guy. I didn't even talk about the freshman class yet of Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, and Logan Saldate. Cam and Micah are early enrollees. Micah's probably a boundary guy to start off with that can also play all over. Cam's probably going to start off as a field outside guy. So when you look at Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Cam Williams, and Micah Gilbert, you're getting 4 outside receivers now what I mean by this is can they play other positions? Of course. I'm talking about guys that are pure outside first receivers. That's what you're talking about adding. I think Chris Mitchell can play inside at times. I think Micah Gilbert can, Cam can, but I'm talking about they are first and foremost outside receivers. Okay, so that's obviously something that fires me up. You've talked about Deion Colsey coming back from being injured last year, and so that's another one. And so you talk about a lot of outside talent that's going to be on the roster this year that they did not have on the roster for most of last year to go with. Jaden Thomas can play out there, and Jaden Greathouse can play out there. You have more size on the roster now. And so you lose 6'4" Tobias Merriweather. The rest of your group that you lost was 6 foot Rico Flores, 6 foot Matt Salerno, and 5'9" Chris Tyree. And now you're replacing them with 6'3" Bo Collins, 6'1" Chris Mitchell, 6'2" Cam Williams, and 6'2" Micah Gilbert. Plus you get 6'4", almost 6'5" Deion Colsey coming back. So you have a lot more size at the receiving core. I think you're going to now be even better in the slot than you were last year from a pure receiver standpoint. Last year you had Chris Tyree playing there, and you had Jaden Greathouse playing there. Chris was a dynamic athlete, but he wasn't a natural receiver. Jordan Faison's a more natural receiver. Jaden Greathouse now goes into year 2. He's obviously going to play in that position. KK Smith is a natural player. He can play Z and play the X position. Or excuse me, he can play the Z position. They used to call it X. Now it's the Z. He can also play the slot. And you're going to have, so he can play that. You're going to have Jaden Harrison that can play the slot. So you're deeper and more dynamic in the slot, top to bottom, than you were a year ago. And then you look at, Jaden Thomas can play that position as well. You've added speed to the roster, right? Outside speed. You had inside speed last year. Jordan Faison has really good speed, in my opinion. Chris Tyree obviously is a dynamic guy. Tobias Merriweather was really the only outside guy last year that could stretch the field. Now Chris Mitchell can stretch the field. Cam Williams can stretch the field. Deion Colsey can stretch the field with size and speed. I think Bo Collins can stretch the field with his speed and size as well, just in different ways. You now have more downfield weapons. And then, of course, I think the playmaking is even better now when you add Chris Mitchell. So I think overall, this receiving core has a chance to really be an outstanding group next year. And it's a group that has me really excited about what they can be. And so I'm fired up about what this group can be. There are some questions, however. Some could be positive. Some are they have to answer them if the group is going to reach its potential. Number one, how will this group be impacted by Riley Leonard? And there's a lot of different ways where you look and say this is going to be a positive, and say, hey, this group has you've got a dynamic athlete at quarterback that can do a lot of different things. And how is that group going to be impacted by this dynamic quarterback? Could it result in more big plays? We'll have to see. And I think it can be. How are they going to be as blockers? How are they going to handle a quarterback that's going to be on the move more? There's a lot of things that kind of come from this, right? That come out of this to say, hey, look, there's going to be some things that this group could benefit from, and then there's going to be some areas where it's going to be a little bit more not problematic. They're going to have to adapt. If they adapt well, it's going to be great. If they don't, it could be a problem. And so if they adapt well, what does that mean? It means you're going to see a lot more of plays like we saw against NC State, where Sam Hartman's running around. They lose Chris Tyree. He gets open on the sideline. You hit him over the top. I think of the play a couple years ago with Tyler Buckner and Chris Tyree, where he's kind of running around and you're kind of running left. Defense comes up. He just pops over their head. I think we're going to see more of that stuff this year with the receiving core, scrambling around, guys coming across, getting open. You're going to see more of that. Another question is going to be who plays where, and that's still to be determined. Where I see it right now is I think Chris Mitchell, Cam Williams, Jaden Thomas, and Jaden Greathouse are all guys that could play that field outside position early on. I think Jaden Thomas will also play in the boundary. I think Jaden Greathouse will also be in the slot. You have Thomas, Colsey, and Micah Gilbert in the boundary for the spring, and then Bo Cons will eventually be added. Bo's also a guy that can play all over the place. And then in the slot, you'll have Faison, Greathouse, KK Smith, and Jaden Harrison playing in the slot, most likely. Although I could see KK moving outside as well because I like him quite a bit. And so there's a lot of different things about it that I like about this group. Now the question is where are they going to play? Who steps up? Right, that's still a big question. We're gonna talk more about who's going to step up and play to their best this season, and we're gonna find out who can become the playmakers because I think Chris Mitchell has a ton of playmaking ability, but does he have that same playmaking ability at Notre Dame that he had at Florida International? We'll find out. Can Bo Collins just translate what he did at Clemson and Notre Dame, or is there another level for him to go to? Can Jane Thomas stay healthy? Can Deion Colsey stay healthy? Can Jaden Greathouse stay healthy? Can Jaden and Jordan Faison take another step as players? Can K. Smith come in and play? Will Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams be good enough to help out as freshmen? So there's still a lot of question marks about this group too, that you can be excited about the talent, and I am. You can be excited about the depth, and I am. And you can be excited about the playmaking potential, and I am, but still acknowledge there's still a lot to prove from this group. They've got to get on the same page of the quarterback. And how will these guys be as RPO players? I think that's also a question as well that you have to look back. And then the final piece is, and this has been a big issue for Notre Dame in recent years, is can they stay healthy? This group has had a really hard time staying healthy in recent seasons. And there's a lot of players coming back who've missed games with injuries, including some of the newcomers. Bo Collins has missed the last 2 games of last year with an injury. And so I think that's the final piece for me about where this receiver room is going to be. But I think the potential's there. So the final question that I always ask when in these positions is this position group going to be a strength or a concern? And I'm going to actually go out on a limb on this one and say strength. And I've been kind of saying both the last couple because there's so many question marks, but I'm kind of tired of using that as sort of the cop-out in this segment. So I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here. I think it's a strength. I think it's a strength because there's a lot of talent. I think it's a strength because there's more potential. There's more playmaking ability. There's more proven depth. There's more proven production than we've seen in the past. And so I think this group is going to be a strength. Yes, there are some questions that have to be answered. There's no question. There's some pieces that they got to figure out how they're going to play together. That's obviously going to be there. But the potential's there for this group to be really, really good. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So that's going to do it for the receiver section, folks. And that's going to do it for the show today. Do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you've not done so, I would greatly appreciate giving us a 5-star review. That would be awesome. If you've not done so, join us on the message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. So since my background is such a distraction for so many of you, and it clearly is an issue for a lot of folks, I'm going to go ahead and end the show now. I'll have it figured out by tomorrow. We'll have everything figured out, and we'll have a better camera and all that kind of stuff, and hopefully it won't be as much of a problem for all of you guys, since that seems to be what everybody wants to talk about, and it's clearly a distraction. So I'll get this figured out. We'll have the camera in a better position tomorrow, and we'll be able to dive into some team topics or some recruiting topics tomorrow. Sound good? So I'm going to get going. I'm going to try to figure all this out, and hopefully you guys can get over the fact that this is such a distraction for you, and we'll have it all figured out tomorrow. So anyways, guys, thanks for being on with me today, even though we're cutting it short. I think good topics. We'll obviously back tomorrow, normal time, 1:00 tomorrow. We'll have Ryan and I, we'll talk signing day and just some different topics. We'll have an IB Nation Sports Talk, I believe, tomorrow, although Sean Stiers is out for the next couple of days. And then Thursday night, 6:00, we'll talk about whatever decision Owen Strebig makes. And we'll talk about just kind of what's next on offensive tackle recruiting. And then we'll be back on Friday. We're going to have our mailbag this Friday. And since we had to switch recruiting and all that stuff, so we'll do our mailbag on Friday. And then they'll have a rapid fire at 5 o'clock on Friday. So that's what we got going on. And we're going to try. I don't know if we're definitely able to do it or not yet, but we're going to try this weekend with Sean Davis and I to bring back the RTCF show. We'll figure out a way to if it's not back this weekend, it'll be back next weekend. But that's what we're going to get going. So anyway, again, sorry about the camera thing for all of you today that were bothered by that. I'm going to go ahead and try to figure out where we're going to get this figured out moving forward. So thanks for being with me. I'll talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.